pollster David Coletto of Abacus Research has been making a lot of noise in 2026 about how Canada has shifted toward what he calls the precarity mindset. This is a mindset where Canadians are starting to realize that the world has shifted, that things have changed, and that what we want more than anything else as a nation is to be able to have a government that can help us navigate the shoals of a very uncertain world where a lot of things just aren't as stable and as predictable and reliable as they once were. So what I find interesting about this is the way it intersects with my book, Bullshit. What Coletto talks about is how precarity is rooted in what is a fundamentally optimistic view of the world, that Canada is doing a good job of skating through whatever needs to be dealt with so that we can have control over our own destiny and do everything that we possibly can to navigate an uncertain world in a way that is deft, in a way that is purposeful, in a way that looks after our national interest. That's wonderful. He actually goes so far as to say that as of late May 2026, 47% of Canadians think that the country is on the right path and have a fundamentally optimistic view. Now, I find that interesting because one of the things I talk about in Bullshit is the subtitle. The subtitle is How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. Now, isn't this interesting? And I want to be very, very clear. I've always thought of myself as being an optimist. So my concern is not with optimism, because I think optimism is a great thing, and I think it works out very well for investors 19 times out of 20. My concern is with optimism bias, which is when you think, oh, everything is fine, nothing needs to change, because it always worked out well in the past. So optimism bias is often rooted in recency bias and status quo bias, and just a view that things will go well in the future simply because things have gone more or less quite well in the recent past. So I find it ironic that even though I'm a big proponent of optimism, but I'm also worried about optimism bias, we have a situation right now in Canada where politically people are actually feeling fairly optimistic, but they're not as at all optimistic about the wider world. Just as Canadians think that we're doing a pretty good job as Canada in dealing with the world, Canadians are overwhelmingly pessimistic about the way the world is going. What I would like to see is something for capital markets that is maybe a little more balanced, that takes into account both things. Be optimistic, sure, but realize that the world might not be such a great place and that we need to be a little more careful in the way we go about our investing. That means not being so easily swayed to assume that what worked in the past will work in the future. Just be guarded, be careful, be diversified within and throughout asset classes. There's a lot of things that are becoming a real challenge. We've got inflation that is becoming more and more of a concern. That means higher fuel costs, higher food costs, and inflationary pressure all around, which means that we might very well be facing rate hikes in the coming months. So that optimism that we've been feeling might not be quite so optimistic in the future. The thing that is really fascinating to me is that David Coletto talks about how when you look at the way people go about making their decisions as political actors, he says that pessimism narrows the minds of people and that people really just want relief. Meanwhile, he says that optimistic people who have that kind of an outlook are more prepared to listen to what has to be said and what is being said, and they'll give the politicians who are telling that story a little more leeway in getting things through. That's what I find is happening right now in capital markets. The advisors who are telling an optimistic story are getting more leeway, and great. I'm glad that people are getting leeway. I'm glad that people are listening. My concern is that the people who are saying, wait a minute, let's just pump the brakes, are being given maybe a bit of more of a short shift because people don't necessarily want to hear that there is risk on the horizon simply because they've been doing well, and they will take the attitude of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My view is that there are things that are very, very risky in capital markets as we head toward the middle of 2026. It's not a forecast. I don't know what the future holds, but it is a very deep and abiding concern that things are very expensive, that there are a number of risks that are not being fully accounted for in the way people go about their investing, and that people might be surprised and they might even be shocked when they find that things aren't going to be altogether perfect going forward. All I'm asking is that you be careful, that you be purposeful, that you make better wealth decisions by reflecting now while you still have time on whether your portfolio makes sense and whether or not you might be taking a bit of undue risk due to the optimism bias of the recent past where things have gone well, rather than looking dispassionately and objectively at the world as it currently is, because things are in fact dangerous. If you're worried about the current investment climate and your money, go to my website to book a call for personalized advice to assist you in feeling secure and protected about your retirement.